Hey, welcome home, family. My name is Thompson in Qatar, and this is Just Ask Podcast, where we believe that the channel we want to see in the world starts with us. And so, in this podcast, I discuss trauma with David Springler, who is a pastor, a mental health and trauma expert, and a student pursuing his master's at St. Andrews University in theology, or as he likes to call it, the art of Bible. And so, he's a father to somebody who has dealt with trauma himself, and yeah, we have a vulnerable and transparent conversation about trauma, how to navigate through trauma, some of the things to do when you're having anxiety attacks or trauma attacks, and just the many major causes of trauma and how to combat it. So I'm hoping that you open with me in this podcast, and let's see how we enjoy it together. Thank you. Okay, I've started to record now.
So how are you doing, sir?
I'm doing well, thank you.
It's good to sit down with you and just have this conversation today.
Thank you. It's great to be here as well.
I really appreciate the opportunity.
Sure.
Okay, so this is Just Ask, it's a podcast that discusses mental health, and I discusses mental health in a variety of spectrums. So we discuss toxic masculinity, emasculation, trauma itself, and things like conjugal procreation and how it affects us as people. And not only that, we also discuss societal issues as a whole. So I think I'd like to first of all have people get your name.
Okay.
Yeah,
Sure.
and apart from that, also get what you do, and then from there on, we can be able to pick it up from what we're discussing today.
Okay, let's see.
So, you can just maybe face the camera and
Sure.
yeah, discuss what's your name, sir?
Okay, so my name is David Springer.
Okay.
I am from Trinidad and Tobago in the Caribbean originally, but I've lived in a couple places around the world, including London, and right now I live in Michigan, USA. I'm a graduate student, and I'm currently pursuing a Master's of Divinity. And I have been serving as a community engagement pastor at a church in Indiana, in USA, for the last 2 years or so. Aside from that, I am also a limited license master social worker, and I have specializations in trauma and mental health.
That's a powerful. What did you pick trauma? Let's start there. Why would you pick trauma for specialization in mental health?
So my own story is filled with trauma. So there's something called adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, and I have several of those. There was a study that was done in the 1990s where an insurance company and the doctors for that insurance company were looking at outcomes in patients and recognizing that there was a correlation between their traumatic past or even the childhood experiences and their health expectations. So we see now that there's a screening tool that can be used by medical professionals, from doctors to nurses to mental health workers, social workers, psychologists, psychiatrists, that can identify some of those and see people's predisposition for trauma, because ACEs are seen as pre-traumatic events. I've had several of them in my family, including the divorce of my parents when I was age 10. I've had also IPV, or intimate partner violence. I've seen that occur in my own home. Some people call it domestic violence. Those are some terms that people use as well. And also intrafamiliar violence, that's another term that is widely used. That also occurred within my formative years.
Okay.
And actually that's what precipitated my parents' divorce. Aside from that, I've had other events within my life that have really left me reeling from the effects of trauma. I see an intersection between trauma and spirituality.
Okay.
And I see how mental health and spiritual health can help a person heal holistically. So that's why I aim to work at the intersection of both.
That's amazing. That's a really, really amazing outlook. And I think one of the major things I appreciate from the precepts that you have given me is the honesty in it. I think that if we're ever going to address anything to do with trauma or mental health, the major aspect is honesty, because that's where we start to heal from, when we can be honest with ourselves.
True.
So, what do you think really leads to trauma for most people, and how do you think you identify trauma as a person? How do I know that, okay, so maybe this could be me facing my trauma? I'd like to tell you a story about myself. There are things that I never was cognizant with, that I think were traumas now after I have learned about it. So I think there are people out there who may be going through trauma itself, but not know that they're in a state of trauma because they're not abreast with the information on trauma.
That's right.
So how do you think one can identify that, okay, so I may be traumatized maybe?
Yeah. So when we're defining trauma,
Okay.
it's an event
Yeah.
that occurs that really overwhelms our ability to cope. So it's something that's outside the ordinary experience of human living.
Okay.
So I can give a few examples for us to help understand. And then this whole discussion of trauma is a very big one.
Okay.
Just talking about different levels of trauma and types of trauma. But one of the simplest ways of looking at it is by understanding that if you're in a war zone, by virtue of you being in that war zone and having a near death or an experience that threatens your life, or you see someone's life being threatened, that experience can leave you traumatized. So trauma is usually associated with things that cause us to be afraid or to fear for our lives. Or maybe we've seen someone lose their life in front of us. So even if you're driving along the road and you see someone, God forbid, get hit by a car and they die, or even if they're not dead but they are just hit by a car, that can leave you traumatized and reeling from the effects of it, where your brain is still trying to just work through and be able to analyze and to be able to heal from what you've just seen. So it is very intriguing that you want to talk about trauma in itself. And I would also like to say that you made a very important point about us being able to be vulnerable.
Oh yeah.
And I know you said the word honest, but I think it takes a certain level of vulnerability
to be honest. True.
So that's why I say what I have learned to be is more than simply just being honest with myself, is being vulnerable enough to share it with others.
Oh yeah.
So like I could share with you and your viewers, hey, this is what happened in my past. And some of these things are things that have left me traumatized, and I've now been able to take steps to work towards healing from trauma.
Okay.
So those are some of the things that I've seen.
All right, that's amazing. If I may ask this person a question, when did you realize that you yourself had trauma, and what made you get prompted to deal with it? Because, sorry to not give you the chance to speak just there. I feel as though there are many things that are a problem that we never get to understand that they're a problem. And so what got you to a point where you said, okay, you know what, this isn't good, and I need to deal with it?
Yeah.
What prompted you to do it?
So I think my first experience with recognizing that I was reeling from the effects of trauma, including the divorce of my parents, and subsequently there was another level of trauma that I had to suffer from, was that I was removed from my home country.
Okay.
I was not in the same home with my dad anymore. My mom, for safety reasons, decided to take my family and I to another country. So I was now not only separated by distance within the same geographic area, but I had gone to a totally different country. So then there was this sense of having to have adjustment, and that in itself created spaces for me where I felt, hey man, I'm not sure about how I'm going to navigate this new space. And then having to get into secondary school in a brand new space, just the way that I was interacting with others, it let those who were looking on recognize, hey, everything is not okay.
With you,
Yeah. So that's just one of the ways.
Oh, yeah.
So I would get into fights. I was an A student, and I was all of a sudden very comfortable at maybe getting a B, maybe just anything above a C is just okay. you know, that sort of thing. And that was a sign of the fact that my brain just was not engaged in the learning process as it was previously. And some of those can be signs of trauma in children especially, but even in adults, we do see there are many different ways in which trauma does manifest itself, even in our daily lives.
Yeah, it's amazing. Why do you feel it's important to have this conversation of mental health? Why is mental health so important for this generation?
So I'll be quite frank. I've seen how people have been able to heal, and that fact that healing is possible gives me hope. So it means that we don't have to stay in that box.
That's an amazing number. Yeah.
We don't have to stay in that prison.
That's amazing.
Because sometimes dealing with the effects of trauma, having mental health issues, even suffering from mental health disorders, it feels like you're trapped.
Okay.
It can feel like you're trapped in your own mind, as it were. So I've seen relatives of mine who have suffered from mental health issues, and their experience has pushed me and prompted me to want to understand it better and to be able to help others who have issues within that space.
That's amazing. That's amazing. I like the fact that you, first of all, call it a prison. It means that it's a place where you need to come out of.
True.
I don't think there's any prison that is good for a person. So that fact, and also just you saying that because it's possible to heal, I think that that's something never so common really. And I think that it's important to say because you've seen people heal from it.
And I also wanted to add, when I really got engaged in it was when I was a teenager.
Okay.
I've always been involved in the helping professions, and being involved in the helping professions can seem like a very good thing because you're always helping someone. But that also could be a sign that you yourself have been hurt and it's a cry for help.
True.
So that was my own experience. So I've been working in the helping professions for the last 17, almost 18 years.
Okay.
And initially it started out as a cry for help. Then after working through my issues, it started out to be, well, wow, now that you understand where the genesis of this has come from, you need to continue helping people.
True.
So that's where it is for me at least.
Okay. How is the status of mental health in both maybe in Michigan and your home country?
Yeah.
What's the difference between the two, and also maybe let's start there. What's the difference between the two, Michigan and your home country?
So I think within the United States, generally, mental health issues are well received and understood to be a part of a person's holistic makeup. So people understand that your mental health, for the most part, your mental health is a part of health.
All right.
There are some places where people have absolutely no clue about what mental health is, and that's even within the US setting.
All right.
And even more so specifically in Michigan. So they have community, and unfortunately it's the communities that tend to be most at risk who have the least access to information and least understanding about what mental health is. So migrant workers, persons who have who live on the lower end of the pay scale. These people tend to have less access, sometimes less education, sometimes less opportunity to understand about mental health being a reality. And they're the ones who suffer greatly just because of the conditions sometimes that they have to face. In my home country, Trinidad and Tobago, I would say that there's an increasing awareness of the need to treat with people's mental health. And there's some excellent young practitioners who are getting involved in the fight for preserving and even the healing of people's minds. So it's becoming more and more of an important thing. Is it where it needs to be? I don't think so. But I guess that is a part of the reality of it being a post-colonial setting as well. We recognize that post-colonial societies tend to assimilate information in different ways, you know. So, and just like Zambia, my country, my home country, was under the British Crown at one point in time. In fact, we got our independence in 1962, and I think you guys got yours in 64.
Yeah. So just 2
So
years.
just 2 years difference. So, but because we're in the Americas, a lot of the influence of the North America, like Canada and the US, is very rampant, especially in entertainment. So more and more people are becoming more aware, and even because of social media, mental health within the last 5 years has been a real buzzword.
Oh yeah.
Especially during COVID-19. That was when there was an explosion.
To deal with their own self.
That's right. People were for the first time having to not only look in the mirror, they were having to sit with themselves and listen to the voices in their own heads. Because many people were isolated.
True.
You know? So
Okay.
yeah.
I'd like to ask you this. How do you think trauma may affect a person out there? Like, what are some of the ways you feel trauma affects you prevalently?
So I would say this. It affects each person
Okay.
in a different way.
That's a good point.
Okay? And there's an amazing illustration that I can remember right now, where there's a big dog and a small dog, and they're both running through a muddy field. The small dog gets muddy up to here,
Okay.
and the big dog just gets his feet muddy. They're both in the same conditions.
Both in mad.
Both are in mud. Both are being stressed out. Both have the same conditions thrown at them, but one is almost drowning, and the other one is able to shrug it off. Because you have to remember that trauma is an experience that is threatens your life or potentially threatens your life, and that overwhelms your capacity to cope. So it's that coping capacity that we're talking about. Now, this is why we also talk about people who have developed coping mechanisms. Now, there's positive coping mechanisms and negative coping mechanisms. So many people who we see who are addicted to alcohol, tobacco, marijuana, pornography. There's just so many different types of addictions. But when you look at it, the root of addiction, so many people, is their trauma, their traumatic past. And I've seen it with clients over and over. And then in my background as well, as a criminal justice practitioner, I've seen that many people who are behind bars, if you ask about their family history, or if you ask about their childhood, you would find that they have many ACEs. They have many pre-traumatic events that compound, and then they also would have had traumatic events as they grew older. And then some of them may have had near-death experiences. Some of them may have seen people being killed right next to them. Trauma affects and damages our brain. So there are actual scans that show how sections of our brain are affected when we become traumatized.
That's amazing. What would you say to somebody who's dealing with trauma out there? What would be your words to them? How would you? Maybe let's just end it there.
Okay, sure. So I would say you can get help.
Okay.
There's hope for healing. And I say that as someone who has been healing himself.
Okay.
I've been healing through over the past maybe 15 years of my life from traumatic events, various traumatic events, some of them I mentioned. So there is healing, there is hope. But it has to be a holistic healing and one that really starts with the process I said of vulnerability. It takes introspection, it takes reflection, it takes you being also willing to connect with someone who's a trained professional to help you work through that. Because many people try to work through it on their own, and sometimes they end up suppressing the symptoms, but the underlying cause never goes away. So working through that with a trained professional, mental health professional, is one of the things that I would advise strongly, and advocate for it strongly. Not only that, there are different ways in which you can cope. There are certain things that I use, including breathing exercises, so that when I'm triggered in terms of my trauma, or even in terms of my own stress response, I can help utilize deep breathing techniques to keep me calm and to help me to not go into dissociative states.
Can we try those?
Sure.
All right.
So
can you teach me how?
There's one that I love to teach, and this one is going to be called pizza breathing.
Okay.
I saw you guys have, is it Panarottis?
Yeah,
Panarottis
and
pizza.
Debonair. We have a couple actually.
Right, Debonair's. Right, so I see you guys in Zambia have those. They have a couple others in the US. I don't want to name them for commercial reasons.
I hear there's a conflict in between New York pizza and pizza from every other.
I'm from Chicago.
Yeah,
Chicago style pizza and New York style pizza is different. I say Chicago way, but that's just me. Because Chicago is a deep dish pizza that's really thick.
I hear New Yorkers say our pizza is the best.
They do say that. Yeah. They do say that, and that's fine. I'm not going to take sides on that one. Okay. But when I say pizza breathing, it's to imagine you've just gotten a really hot slice of pizza in your hand.
Okay.
So you literally hold your hand out like this. You visualize that you have this hot pizza. Could you join me in doing it?
Let's do it.
So you have this in your hand right in front of you.
Okay.
But as you have it in front of you, the first thing that strikes you is not only the color and the glistening of the pizza, but the scent.
That it has.
You smell this pizza, and you're like, I'm so hungry, I want to eat some of this pizza.
Oh yeah.
So the first thing you do is you let it come to you, and you inhale.
Okay.
And you hold it there for a second, and then you have obviously you want to take a bite, but it's too hot, so you have to.
That's great.
Blow the pizza, but then you want to do it again, so you. And you. Do it again, inhale. And out. One more time. And out. Now I don't know about you, but I started to feel my shoulders.
I could feel myself.
Yeah, I could feel the shoulders just dropping.
What did you call it again?
Pizza breathing.
Pizza breathing. That's
Yeah.
amazing. That's
Pizza breathing, and that's just one of the many ways that we can use.
Okay.
And that's just one that I would like to leave you guys with. There are many others.
Oh yeah.
There are also many books out there that you can read and learn more about trauma. There is, I'm blanking out on the name right now, but I'm going to give it to you in a second.
Okay.
The Body Keeps Score.
The Body Keeps Score.
That's the name of the book. And that's a book all about trauma, explaining to you about how your body does keep score. And then there's another famous book that is called The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog.
Okay.
And that is another one that talks to you, shows you different stories.
I'll be sure to put them down in the description so people can peek at them.
Yeah, so you can check them out. They're all on Amazon. They're Kindle versions, so I'm sure you can get them pretty easily.
Okay.
And I think pretty cheaply as well too.
Okay, if I could dive into you just for a moment. Earlier when we were having our lunch, you told me that you're writing a book. Do you mind telling me what it's about? Just does it have an aspect of mental health in it?
It does.
Okay.
It is chronicling several different ways in which men especially can start to heal. Okay. And the idea behind it is your tears have value.
It's amazing.
Because as men, many times we feel as though our tears have no value.
So there's no point to cry.
There's no point to cry. But it's just chronicling ways in which and showing how your tears do have value. Whether you have internal tears like many of us do, or you have external tears, whichever one, the idea is that you'll be able to walk through it, see from some of my own personal experiences. I'm quite vulnerable in the book, that show you that even as a man, especially as a male, you are allowed to be emotionally vulnerable.
It's amazing.
And I do have some elements of some spirituality in there.
Okay.
And I do look at famous spiritual leaders, one including Jesus Christ, and looking at how Jesus himself, in his interactions with people and his disciples, would have just recognized his own emotions. Even so that one of the most famous texts in the world is very short, but it says, Jesus wept.
He wept.
So your tears have value.
They do have value.
So that's
Appreciate that, Mr. David. Thank you very much for being here with me. I really appreciate you finding the time to sit down with me and have this conversation, especially on mental health. here in Zambia, mental health is something we're still learning to adopt. It's not a conversation that's in every home. It's to some places it's still are taboo to discuss and things that have to do with you being ill mentally. But however, I feel like this conversation is one of those that breeds that nuance that's coming to say we are learning to accept certain things like that.
Sure.
And I don't think only Zambia, but even Africa as a whole. I think people like you have had the opportunity to travel the world. You've gotten to see that when you tell people about something that has to do with their mental health, it's usually a foreign conversation. But you can tell people about anything to do with their physical health.
So true.
So I appreciate you having the time to sit down with me.
Sure. And I want to say it's not just an African thing. It's something that happens straight across the world in the African diaspora. So wherever there are melanated peoples across the world, there's some hesitance in terms of
towards it. But I really appreciate your vulnerable talk as well. I mean, towards the topic of trauma, and I'm glad to know that there are people out there who are seeing things from that perspective. And also I like the fact that you highlighted one of the major things, which is the fact that you've seen people heal and that you know that it's possible to heal. You yourself being one of the people that have got into hell. And I really thank you for having to sit down with me. People would like to find you somewhere, so maybe you could just put up your Instagram perhaps.
Sure. Could I give you the links and you put it on there?
Sure. That would be good.
I can give you my links. So people could get in contact with me as well. I would be able to do that. And I have Facebook and I have Instagram. So both of them, I can give the links to you so you can put it in the description.
That would be great. I will surely put them there. So thank you very much. This was Mr. David Springler. Is not only a pastor, as you heard, but he's also a mental health social worker who has majored into trauma and mental health as well. So I really appreciate you being here, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you for being good to me too. Mr. David has been more than just good to me. I really appreciate it, and I'm sure that I have a lot to learn from you. Just not only as this person, but also as a young brother. And I'm sure that there's a lot of places that what I would learn from you will take me. And I really appreciate this talk. Really. Thank you so much.
Same here.
All right.
I appreciate your time. Thank you so much
for
coming to be here.
Thank you. Ish, I hope.